to you all. Fantastic that so many people found their way here to this session today. My name is Marielle Julin, and I represent the SI Governance Hub core team that are organizing this session today, which is focusing on evaluating systems change initiatives. With me today, I have my fellow core team members, Isaac and Martin and Brendan, who you will get to know throughout the session. They will be part of basically moderating in this. Do you want to say a really short, brief thing about yourselves? Starting with Martin.
Hey everybody, this is Martin Lens Fitzgerald in the core hub here of the government hub team of the SI network, calling from you from Amsterdam, where I work at the innovation department of the city. So hello and looking forward to a great session.
Fabulous. Brendan.
Everyone, Brendan Halloran, Washington, D.C., independent consultant working on governance issues. Great to be part of the session.
Fabulous. Isaac?
G'day everyone, Isaac Riley in Canberra, in Australia, working in the federal government, currently in the Department of Health and Aged Care, looking to transform the aged care sector. So welcome everyone.
Fabulous. And as I said, my name is Marielle. I'm based in Sweden, where I currently manage a program, an innovation program, which is focusing on systems innovation and systems effects. So this is incredibly topical for me as well. So today's session, everyone, what is the purpose and goal of that? Well, we have seen throughout the existence of this hub that there's a great need for understanding how to work with systems approaches and innovation. And of course, part of that is understanding how to actually understand and evaluate these kind of initiatives. So it was with great pleasure that we were able to get our prominent speakers that we have with us today to agree to join this session and share some of their knowledge. And we're hoping very much so that this event will inspire and give you good clues on how to use this kind of systems evaluation approaches yourselves. We will also hear from you throughout the session what your thoughts and views are on various topics. As you can see in the agenda, we will have a quick icebreaker to see where everyone is coming from today. We will then go over to a brief introduction to the speakers, and both Margaret and Jordi, who are speakers, will have about 20 minutes presentation, and we will throughout that also be able to post questions on the Miro board. I believe that the link to the Miro board has been shared in the chat, so you can access it there. And don't worry if you are new to Miro, you can always post your thoughts and ideas in the chat, and we will help you post it on the board. And after a swift break, we will have some breakout sessions that will be hosted by the core team members. So with that said, over to you, Isaac, for a brief icebreaker.
Thanks, Marielle. So just to warm us up a little bit, we've got 2 activities. So the link to the Miro board has been placed in the chat. You might have to scroll up past all the city locations, but it is in there. So dive in there. If you're unable to join, if you're on a phone or such, feel free to drop your answers into the chat and we'll put them on the board for you. Just note your who you are when you're doing it. I see people have dived in already. That's fantastic. No instructions needed. That makes for a good, someone's moving it. Makes for a good design. So effectively, how are you checking in today? High energy, high mood. That's your top right-hand color there. Pick the colored dot that corresponds to your mood and energy and place it on the globe, on the map, sorry, of the world where you're calling in from today. Just give you a couple of minutes for that one.
Fabulous to see so many people join in from different parts of the world.
Do have a hotspot in Europe there, by the looks of things.
Yep. Of course, it's always a bit challenging to get a timetable that works across the globe, as we know.
Just going to zoom in here. Oh, we've got some low energy, low mood. Hopefully we can fix that for you. At least the mood. It is 11 p.m. here, so I have an excuse for my energy.
Yep.
We'll just give it a couple more seconds. We do have a few more dots going on, and then we'll shift across to the second activity, which is right beside the first. South America, North America, Central America, fantastic. Where is this?
This is supposed to be Singapore, but I think the map is wrong in that part of Asia. I can't really place it.
Fantastic. Thank you for that.
We need to get a reality check on this map, obviously.
We'll update that map. Thank you.
Fabulous.
Yeah, I think there's the most of Indonesia is missing. Yeah, Indonesia is missing.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then I think parts of Indonesia. No, it's a total mess down there. I don't know what's between Australia and Southeast Asia.
dear.
There is somebody forgot that part of the world.
Half of Papua New Guinea is missing.
Yeah, we need to fix that part of the world, clearly. Great.
All right. I see the cursors are slowing. Fantastic. Thank you, guys. Good to see a good spread of people there. So on to the next activity. This just gives us an idea of, or more specifically, our speakers, a bit of an idea of your experience in this particular topic. So if you can look at the matrix here, we've got on the y-axis your level of experience in systems, applying systems innovation, and the X is in evaluating systems. So place a dot in that matrix where you feel your experience lies. So you're either a system ninja or system infant, a measuring ninja or a measuring infant. Sort of a linear trend here across the middle. A few outliers. It's good to see. And I am pleased to see some in the top quadrant here. And a star. Excellent. Good. Might have to call out the star later, see who that is. What? Oh. Okay. Fantastic. All right. Awesome. Well, welcome everybody. Thanks for giving us a bit of an understanding where you're coming from, how you're feeling today, and a bit of your experience in this particular topic. Without further ado, I'll hand back to Marielle to launch us into the actual topic of the day. Thanks, Marielle.
Thank you so much. And as I said briefly during the introduction, we're very pleased to have two very prominent speakers with us today. The first speaker is Margaret B. Hargreaves, who is currently a senior fellow with the research organization NORC with the University of Chicago, where she's active in both the healthcare evaluation team department and also linked to the Center of Equity Research. She's recognized for her expertise in evaluating equitable systems change initiatives that address complex social issues, including prevention, mitigation, and treatment of child abuse, racial and ethnic disparities in healthcare, place-based population change initiatives, etc. She is also a member of the American Evaluation Association Evaluation Policy Task Force, and has served as program chair of its Systems in Evaluation Topical Interest Group, among many other things. But without going into further detail, I'm sure, Margaret, you can add to that as well. We are very much looking forward to your presentation. And while we listen to Margaret, I want to say, for those of you who have found the Miro board, if you look to the right of the Miro board, you can actually add your questions during the session over here. And you can put in your questions there to Margaret and Jordi. And if you have questions to both, please do that as well. So I shall hand over the word to Margaret, and we'll listen to a presentation about 20 minutes. So over to you, Margaret.
Thanks very much. I will share my screen in a second, but first I wanted to say that I just appreciate the opportunity to speak to this group, especially the global breadth of the people who are represented. What I'm doing today is a short version of a presentation that I and my colleagues gave as part of a systems thinking masterclass. It was a global masterclass with 14 sessions. And there's a link to it at the end. It's called the ECDAN, ECDAN Systems Masterclass. You'll find 14 sessions, all 90 minutes long, in English and Spanish, with the slides, the resources and materials, and the recordings. So that's a wealth of information, and I'll be quickly going through just a small set of slides from our presentation. So if you feel I'm skipping over everything, I only have 20 minutes, and you can absolutely go to that resource and find the full slide deck. So let me share my screen and go through the presentation. So I'm here representing my colleagues, Chandria Jones and Brandon Coffey Borden. And I just wanted to be able to say that I didn't create all of this. This was really a team effort. Part of what has already been mentioned is, first of all, many people know me as Meg Hargreaves, but now with Zoom it's changed. So now it's back to the official name, which I rarely get to change. So if you're like, wasn't this Meg Hargreaves? Yes, it is. It is me. But I wanted to talk about the basis of this framework that I'll talk about today, which comes from NORC's Equity Science, and it has 4 principles. And these principles are first, positionality and self-reflection, which means examining power dynamics and dismantling unequal power hierarchies in systems. The second principle is about culture and community engagement that centers and empowers the people who are being researched and evaluated. The third is about democratization of the evaluation and research process. And the fourth is about having a systems focus. And the framework that I created with Brandon and Chandria is, as you heard, the Equitable Systems evaluation and learning framework, and it incorporates and operationalizes all of those 4 principles that I just mentioned. So systems thinking, as you know, is about asking questions and investigating the systems and structures that foster social inequities and how these inequities are created and maintained, and how to identify the root causes of these inequities and address those, and thereby dismantling the systems that create such harm. The framework that we created has 8 steps, and the first 4 steps, which starts with prepare for the evaluation, are not just about doing an evaluation, but actually designing the initiative itself and building the capacity to do the initiative as well as the evaluation. And then the final 4 steps are really about the evaluation itself. So the first 4 steps are preparing for the evaluation and the initiative, including creating the team, the leadership involved. Second is assessing and mapping the system or situation of interest. Third is clarifying the initiative and identifying its theory of change and strategies. The 4th step is building the capacity to actually carry out what is a pretty complex initiative or effort to both change systems and also evaluate that change. Then we move into the details of evaluation. And so the 5th step is about co-designing evaluation with key players and partners. The next 6th is about adapting the methods and the metrics to the specifics of the situation. The 7th is collecting diverse data from multiple sources to capture different aspects of the implementation and outcomes of these initiatives. And then the 8th is really working with others to interpret and report the findings to key audiences. This is supported by 3 disciplines that I'll say more about in a second. This should, for those who do evaluation, this should be a typical cycle of evaluation, but with additional emphasis on the design piece at the beginning. So the very first step is really about assembling a team, not only of evaluators, but of other partners who have the needed knowledge and background and experience to both implement and evaluate a systems intervention. And you can see there's key competencies, and they include having an understanding of systems thinking. The second is called a knowledge of culturally responsive equitable evaluation. That is an approach that we use in the US called CRE. The third, again, it's about self-awareness and understanding your positionality in this system. It's also about having a diverse team with the subject matter expertise that's needed, as well as this is a very socially interactive process, and so it requires group facilitation skills as well. One of the key things that's needed of this team is the ability to practice reflectively, and this reflective practice is meant to support critical thinking, the ability of the team to review their assumptions, and to be willing to adjust and adapt their approach and ideas to support continual learning and development. That's not always the case in evaluation. Often it's just for monitoring, but this is really about using evaluation for learning and adaptation. It's also important to be, and the reason why I emphasize the first step so much, it's who is involved. It's really key to the whole rest of the process. And so it's important to realize that you need to include those who have an interest in this, and that doesn't mean that the degree of interest, it's actually the people with the moral, ethical, and legal right to be involved in or consulted in this process. It involves those who are impacted directly or indirectly, both at individual and other levels, and also those who have influence on the evaluation, often the funders who can influence the process and the outcomes. And it involves all of those groups, and it can involve recruitment and care in developing that team. It's also important to recognize that this isn't just an advisory group. This is actually a decision-making group, and they have the responsibility to define the initiative strategies and adjust them, to allocate the resources to the initiative as well as the evaluation, and to really have an understanding of the complexity of the environment and the ability to navigate that. So enough about step one, but let's go to step two, which is very common in systems initiatives, which is about being able to map and understand the system or situation under inquiry. And that includes clarifying the boundary of the system, understanding the entities or the parts within that system and their interrelationships, and the cause and effect relationships among them that are not always linear or direct, and to be able to visualize that and to map that. And there are multiple methods for it, from more informal creation of rich pictures, literally drawing pictures of the system, to doing more formal causal loop analysis, looking at the interaction of factors, to a very expert level quantitative modeling of systems dynamics. It all depends on your capacity and interest, but the key is, and the goal here is to create a comprehensive and cohesive visualization of the system to help the group understand the system in its context and to be able to talk about it together and to use that to make decisions about their intervention and to decide on elements of the intervention, including the scope, which I'll go to next. So part of this is, once you understand the complexity and immensity of the system, it's important to decide what's within your ability to actually change and to figure out the scope of the intervention. Is it an incremental change or innovation or improvement of a part of the system? Is it a reform of an organization or set of institutions that's a larger effort? Or is it really very broad and multi-level and multi-sector? And I know that our next speaker is going to talk more about multi-level systems change. And is it really at the scope? And are you capable of managing system transformation either by yourselves or with others? And so it's also important to talk through what are the leverage points that you see that you have an opportunity and ability to influence, that then results in a clarification of the strategies that your initiative is seeking to do. Part of this is understanding who is the leadership or what's the governance. How are you going to work together? And so there are several models here, and thinking of either leadership can be a single entity is leading the effort, or it could be a backbone organization facilitating leadership of others, or it can be shared, more distributed. An example is this Systems Innovation Network. And so I sort of asked the question, your governance hub, where do you fit within those different models? I don't know, you tell me. Beyond that, there is the next step, which is 4, which is unusual in evaluation, but is really important. And that's to be able to, one of the key factors of the success of an initiative and its evaluation is the capacity that exists at individual or organizational or collective levels to be able to actually carry out the initiative and to be able to carry out an evaluation of the initiative. And I've just been an evaluator of so many examples where the group is not ready, they aren't able to carry it out, and then it just makes the evaluation just such, you have to document the failure of the initiative when it really wasn't ready to be evaluated. Although you can help develop an initiative using developmental evaluation, but to be able to, but even that takes quality and effort. So the question people have is, so how do you measure capacity? And are there valid and reliable measures of this? And 9 years ago, I was doing an evaluation in Washington State, and they said, well, just survey us about our coalition's capacity. And so we found that there were no valid and reliable measures of coalition capacity. And so over 9 years and multiple iterations and testing and improvement of this survey, it's called the Collective Community Capacity, or C3 survey. It has 6 domains: tracking and measuring collaborative capacity around a shared vision, the ability to measure and use data to guide community and system change efforts, active engagement of the community in which you're working, an equitable form of leadership that is somewhat distributed, And then actually having effective strategies. It's enough to build a capacity, but if you don't have evidence-based or useful or promising, or there's some theory behind your strategies, they need to be effective, they need to be innovative, and they need to operate at multiple levels. And then finally, it's not enough to develop this. You need to have the structure and the resources to be able to sustain and carry out what can be a very long process. And so this survey exists. It's in English and Spanish. It's free. You can do this at a point in time. You can also do this retrospectively. And there are links to this survey if you would like to use it. So let's go to the next step. The next step is really, finally, we get to the details of the co-design of the evaluation. And this is like most evaluations where you have to plan and design and decide what's included in the evaluation. The key here is that it needs to be co-designed with the community and in a process that's mutually beneficial and incorporates the people impacted. And so you go through the typical evaluation clarification of what are the learning questions and the learning processes and the concepts and the methods and the metrics, but you do that in a way that isn't the evaluator setting the tone or leading or making these decisions on their own. It's more collaborative than that. It's not that hard. You just have to have an approach and a willingness to do that. And so I'm going to provide an example of a project that I've used several times here. It's a current project that I'm leading. It is with the MacArthur Foundation. It's a national initiative that is to, their goal is actually systems change of the local jail systems across the United States, a very ambitious 10-year, more than $100 million initiative that has multiple elements. And so we worked with them to identify, we came in halfway through and we helped them identify their goals and their questions about how effective their initiative is and for whom it is effective. We identified and clarified the measures of interest. They are seeking to measure and change, reduce jail populations. We have the largest mass incarceration of any country in the world, and also how to reduce the disparities, racial and ethnic disparities of those jail populations. We worked with them to clarify both a logic model for the entire initiative, as well as with the 26 communities with which they're working intensively. And at an initiative level, they're not only seeking to support local innovation, but also to spread the knowledge of what's working through networked communities of practice and changing the national mindset around over-incarceration through national communication strategies, and then dissemination of that research to support further work. The next step, the fourth step in this design, was to create culturally appropriate instruments. And here we increased the level of an amount of qualitative data collection that was used in the evaluation. And this then focused on the disparities in the system. And that meant analysis of the local strategies and looking at not only, but looking at individual anti-bias strategies, but also organizational cultural change strategies in jail systems, and then structural policies that affect who is over-incarcerated. Finally, the sixth step of this was this is now year 8 of that initiative, and over the years they have increased their engagement with communities and increased the engagement of their racial equity cohorts and housing and community engagement cohorts in the evaluation process. The next step is really about adapting the tools for the situation, and I'll use this, we call it the Safety and Criminal Justice SJC initiative as examples. So we included measures of systems justice and I'll talk about the different methods that were used. There was it has an outcome study comparing the SJC sites, the implementation sites with matched comparison sites, looking at changes in average daily jail population, average length of stay in jail, the who's detained pretrial, which means being jailed before you're sentenced, and looking at the proportion of people who are non-white. And by comparing the SJC sites and the non-SJC sites, we're able to identify where the initiative is having a positive impact and where it's falling behind. In terms of measuring the second piece, which is changing system conditions, we have a communication study that is using national and local opinion polls, social media, listening scans and listening studies to be able to track changes in people's perception of crime and safety, their perception of the fairness of the local justice system, and their approval for different reforms. The third is about adjusting methods as the project goes along. And in the first 5 years of that initiative, before NORC became the evaluator, they realized they had dropped jail populations, but without a reduction in disparities. So the initiative changed its strategies. It added more emphasis on that. It also changed evaluators. It brought in system evaluators and equity evaluators to look at this more carefully. And it also changed its methods and metrics. So this is what we mean by adapting tools. It's also important to not be fuzzy about what we mean by equity. It's not equality. It's not about everybody being the same. It's about everyone having the same opportunity. And so I wanted to emphasize that this includes being clear about different kinds of equity. And I'll use as an example, in the United States, we have extreme racial segregation in our geographic locations. And it's a country where the zip code, where you are born and where you live, affects your economic and social and education and healthcare outcomes and life expectancy. And that's not a broad zip code. That's within specific neighborhoods, just a few blocks away from each other. That can have a significant impact on your life trajectory and expectancy. So when you think about measuring change, if you think about this, in those communities, there is a difference in the distribution of public resources or in the quality of those public services. You can see differences in level of discrimination, such as police brutality in those geographic areas. That's a procedural equity issue. You can also look at equity of influence, and down to the community and sub-community level, you can look at differences in people's ability to vote, or even restrictions or placement of voting locations, even down to that geographic level. And then in terms of informational equity, there are disparities in the digital divide, where at community levels, differences in terms of broadband internet access. All of those things can influence and create system inequities that result in disparities, that result in the significant inequities that we see in the United States. And so all of those things can be things you try to change, and also things that you can try to measure.
So Meg, I just want to say you have about a minute to wrap up here.
Okay. So the final piece is really, I'll just be quick, is use mixed methods, not qualitative and quantitative. Try to time your data collection across levels so that you have waves of data collection that match. Use multidimensional measures, and think about the cultural dynamics of the data collection process. The final step is about having an opportunity to use and interpret the data using participatory processes. And these can include data parties. And sometimes data parties are called participatory analysis, or sense making, or results briefings, or data walks. And you can see examples of these. There are different ways to do this, but one is literally having a placemat. You literally put graphs in front of people and they can talk about them. Or a second thing is called a gallery walk, where people literally walk around and interact and look at posters of information. You can focus on time trends and talk about changes in various conditions. And you can also use this group process where people individually think about and interpret the data, then 2 people talk about it, then a larger group talks about it, and then everyone talks about it. So it's a way to have sort of a group consensus building around what the findings ought to be. And the final step is about sharing the findings in equitable ways, which really I just want to emphasize here about thinking hard about who are the potential users of this, not talking over that audience, but meeting these audiences where they are, encouraging use and ongoing dialogue about these findings. And most importantly, I think, is not to use and impose your definition of success or the funder's definition of success, but also if the people involved or who are impacted also would agree with you that the program or initiative's been a success. So I want to end here with the reference to the systems masterclass. You can go there and find just a treasure trove of lectures and presentations, discussions with practitioners, and resources. And it's free, globally accessible. Share it with whomever, because I co-created this with the Early Childhood Development Action Network, a global network created by UNICEF and World Bank and others, and it's meant to be shared globally. So please make full use of that.
Great, thanks. And we will be sharing the slides as well after the session, together with the recording. So these will be accessible to look at. So thank you so much, Meg, for that. Really, really interesting. We have thousands of questions, of course. But before we go into those, we'll let our second speaker, Jordi Molasca-Llar, come in. And Jordi is not only a research professor at the Spanish Council for Scientific Research and working at Ingenio, a joint institute of Spanish Council for Scientific Research and the Polytechnic University of Valencia. He's also a dear friend who I've had the opportunity to work with over the years at SPRU, the University of Sussex, where you also worked for many years as a senior lecturer. I think you got your PhD from there as well. And Jordi is probably known for you who have been interested in systems evaluation for a while. He's published a lot on the topic. He's led many research and consultancy projects for a variety of clients around the globe, a lot for the European Commission, but also for various departments in various countries, of course, in the UK and France and Spain, etc. And I really value your expertise, and very much looking forward to hearing your take on these very complex issues, which I think you have mastered. So we're looking forward to hearing more about it, Jordi. Welcome.
Thanks, Mariel, and thanks for this very kind introduction. I'm not sure I fully deserve it. I will first try to share my screen. Let's see if this works. Share. And then let me see. And that goes here. Okay, so that's so I'm not sure I fully deserve it, because in fact I wanted to start with 2 confessions. One is that I'm not really a systems thinker. I mean, I'm just somebody who's done, as Mariel said, evaluation for a number of years. That's evaluation of all of science and innovation policies, and was put in a position some years ago to start working with a consortium doing developing ideas about the transformative innovation policy. And I was, in a way, taking care of the evaluation part of that. And was only after some time that it dawned on us that we were doing kind of systems evaluation or evaluation of systemic change. And that's the, in my mind, these concepts that were not that clear to me, maybe they're not even now clear to me. I felt that I had the need to clarify what we meant, or what I mean now, for evaluating system change. And I made a presentation that was all rather theoretical and conceptual. And I had to have Mariel coming and reminding me all the time, but Jody, tell us about something practical, something you did. And despite all the reminders, the presentation itself, the slides have little of specific examples. So I'll build examples on top of it as I make the presentation. And what I will do, what I thought I would do, is to take one example of a very specific case we did and illustrate through that case the kind of theoretical conceptual approaches I will present. And the case is a set of actors in what happens to be the town where I was born. That's called Manresa. And that's quite, a small 60, 70,000 people town in the middle of Catalonia, in where a community, what you could call it a community of practice, developed that was concerned about one of the problems that the town was facing, that was aging. I think it's the oldest town in Catalonia, for sure, and one of the oldest in Spain. And the concern was about chronic ailments in the population of the town and the impact they had as the town was getting older and older. And that community of practice included a small, what you would call applied science university, local hospitals, spin-offs that had come from the university, local companies. You had patient organizations, and also organizations and representative of the care community. And they started working together, and they received funding from the regional government, and that's when we came in and we helped them in that initiative. So that's going to be the example I will refer to. And so going back then about all the things that are theoretical. So what I mean by systemic interventions. So policies whose ultimate goals require systemic change. That is, changes that must occur in several interconnected dimensions. And so what we're evaluating is initiative, policies, interventions that deliberately want to create this systemic change. What would be the difference in my town? Because innovation and science policy have tended to be very linear. That's where I come from. I come from a tradition of thinking in stages. You have research, then you have applied research, then you have technological development, then you have innovation. And in the same language we speak, this concept of linearity is intrinsic, and we think in that way. So it's very difficult for us to start thinking in a systemic way. So normally an intervention of that kind that would target problems of aging from a traditional innovation policy approach would be, I don't know, you fund the company in my town that, for instance, and that's an example, producers has developed a specific type of bed. So you fund it, you support this technological development so that it can commercialize it. So it's a point intervention. And the funder can quite happily fund this company, go away, and after a few years see what has happened. And so that's what I call here these insular traditional interventions. So you take a specific dimension that would be the technological and the market here. You think that once you develop this, if you are successful, commercialization benefits will take place. And those can be more or less assessed within the time frame of the intervention. Have you patented things? Have you commercialized with some success? And you know where you are going. You know your output is the commercialization of the bed. You have a clear idea of what you have to expect. This bed will provide benefits to all patients because they will be more comfortable. The systemic intervention, the kind of things that that community were thinking were different. We're thinking if we really want to increase welfare, even if you think about the introduction of a technological improvement like would be a specific bed, you have to change things in the whole system. You have to change probably the way in which hospitals procure their beds. You have to let companies that are small adapt to regulations that are very complex or adapt those regulations. Maybe change the culture of the same users that will not be used to use such a big implement. And that the implementation of this bag will be connected to a series of changes and innovations in other dimensions that are cultural, that they are market, that they are industrial, that they are regulatory, that are all interconnected in complex ways. And therefore, once you have the idea that to improve the welfare of the aging population, you have to address all these interacting dimensions in a simultaneous way, things get very complicated. And the impacts will be expected will be long-term, will be further away from the further much in time, much later than when the intervention has been completed. You will have uncertainty because complex systems, when you do complex mapping, you will realize everything is interconnected, and you know that you are in this world in which small changes can produce along the line changes that are completely out of very different in the scope and in dimension to the initial small change that triggered them. So you have a level of uncertainty, you have typical tipping points, and therefore your intervention is not built on the idea that you have certainty about what you can expect, but more or less almost the contrary. You are almost trying. It's experimental, but not in the experimental sense of having a control group in which everything is very controlled. It's experimental in the sense that you are learning by doing, by trial and error, and you have this very progressive way of developing and implementing policy. That's a systemic intervention. So how do you, and I think that you cannot see the title of the slide because I have this rank of menu controls there, but anyway, doesn't matter. And here the question is, once you have this situation, this complex situation, this intervention that is trying to enact systemic change, how do you assess it? And we had a series of principles here. First, you have to have an idea of what you want to do and why. So my argument would be, you need a theory of change. There are some people that work on the systems intervention world criticize even the same notion of having a theory of change. We have developed approaches that start, in fact, designing a theory of change, but this is flexible. So the whole process of evaluation is in part thinking about your initial goals, expectations, and then reforming them, changing them as you have empirical evidence of what has happened. So the theory of change is flexible. Then you have to focus on outcomes. And we define outcomes as changes in behavioral organizations instead of outputs or impacts. What would be an output would be a direct result of an intervention. You find that company that was developing this bag, that company has patented. That's an output. And it's a lot in innovation policy in which you will measure your success by numbers of patents, numbers of publications when you are funding scientific research. So that's one way of going about it. Of course, the outputs, the number of patents don't mean that these patents will be commercialized, will be licensed. Even if they are licensed, the money they may not really be an indicator of the impact on the welfare of the patient you were trying to achieve. And that impact goes very far away. So to say that you're going to change, in the case of Manresa, a change in the system of care for the elderly that have problems of chronicity, of chronic diseases, you want a systemic change that will occur a long time in the future. So doesn't really make much sense to assess an intervention that has been designed for a period of 3 years in relation to the impacts that will have to come much longer afterwards. So what we're focusing is on outcomes. It's an outcome on changes in behavior, organizations that can be attributed to that specific intervention that are connected to the outputs, and that we consider that they are that will come before they will be conducive to the final impacts you are trying to assess. And therefore, the whole process is oriented to understanding these processes, and because these processes take place in a complex, very specific, very contextual dependent situation, you have to work with those who are involved in the situation. And that's things that Margaret that has already talked, and just stressed a lot, and we also stress a lot, is the nature of participation. Those are participatory process. This is a formative evaluation in the sense that they're trying to act to contribute to the definition of that policy, to the adaptation of that policy, and because that policy is adapted. And in fact, when you do the theory of change, you do it at the beginning of the project. In a way, something that in Margaret's presentation was also there. You have that the process of policy design is not segmented. It's not that now you define, then you implement, and afterwards you evaluate, as it would be in a traditional linear intervention in which the evaluation comes once you have implemented. Here, the process of evaluation, when we came into supporting this kind of processes, we come when the intervention is defined. And in a way, you implement as you define as you implement, and the process of evaluation also occurs concurrently. So you have a system, a way in which you do policy, in which these stages are concurrent. And that's a way that this is very different from the way in which policies in our context, in the Spanish context of rather, very bureaucratic approach to public policy management, is comfortable with. That's not what a bureaucratic system will kind of welcome. So how do you do that? You develop a theory of change. A theory of change is no more than thinking, I'll take this, sorry. It's just how you expect the changes to happen as a result of your intervention. And this is developed, and we did this with this community of different actors in Manresa. We held workshops in which we were thinking about what were they doing, and for what goal, and what kind of organizational and behavioral changes they were aiming at. And in that way, we were pressing them to be quite specific about what these outcomes were to be, about the assumptions they were bringing into the intervention. And in this sense, the theory of change and the building of the theory of change, which was again participatory, was a community effort, is part of the whole process of policy design and of the design and implementation of the intervention. As I said, an adaptive management tool rather than one-off exercise in the design phase, which is usually how it is thought. First you get your theory of change, then afterwards you will evaluate. Here it's a tool to allow you to adapt your intervention as it evolves. But this theory of change doesn't come, it's not any theory of change. In our perspective, it had to have a theoretical understanding of the change process. And that's where the academic theory came in. What we call we call it the generic theory of change, was the underlying theoretical assumptions that support the way we are acting and the way we are designing. And that was this notion of the multi-level perspective to understand systemic change, innovative systemic change, transformative innovation. The goal in our case was transformative, clearly. And there is a set of basically historians, academics that have been studying innovation, long-term innovation processes, that have put forward this theory, which is now very, very, very famous and very much almost an orthodoxy in the field of systemic transitions, that systemic change occurs as the result of landscape pressures, things that are happening at a broader level, say climate change or aging, that are putting a pressure on the current regime regime being the way we do things, and those combined with alternative practices that are different but are developing in small niches at the margin of this regime. And it's when these niches scale and grow that together with the landscape pressures can destabilize the existing regime and give birth to a different regime. This is a kind of a theory, this is a theory, and in this theory, we base the kind of a conceptual layer on which we use to orient intervention. We think in terms of niches, how you protect these niches, how do they grow, how do they interact with the dominant system. And this is, it's written academically in an article, leads to the notion of transformative outcomes, which is basically an heuristic that then we use in the process of developing the theory of change and thinking of outcomes to classify the outcomes that we are identifying. And as I said, those are related to the building up of the niche, to how it is embedded in the existing, in the broader context. As you scale up, you can circulate the ideas, you can try to replicate it in different places, and how it relates to the current regime. So this is classified. Our part of our work is to present these concepts, which are rather complex in themselves, quite complicated, and try to use this quite intricate framework in order to help the communities that are working with this think about the transformative potential of their interventions and think where they are placing their outcomes, the outcomes they are trying to achieve within this framework. And so the theories of change that we come up with, here is the one in my town, which unfortunately is in Catalan, so not even if you put it in one of these artificial intelligence translators will translate it to you. But I put it there because usually when you do a graphical representation of a theory of change, you have boxes and arrows. And that's fine. But when you think in terms of systemic changes, these boxes and arrows will be so intricate that in a way can lose utility. And we tended to pay attention to the graphic representation in a way that would be different and would be visually relatively appealing. We took care of this. And in fact, we know that people in Manresa and other places we have worked with have printed these graphical representations, have put them into on their walls. And what we have here is the 4 big points on the outside are main outcomes that they want to achieve. So the focus is on these outcomes. For instance, I will translate the institutions that are involved in the shared agenda. That's the name that was given to the whole set of interventions. Will collaborate in order to address the problems and the needs, blah, blah, blah. So the outcome, the organizational change we are pursuing is a higher level of interinstitutional collaboration. And that then it is understood as a type of transformative outcomes. These little pictures around the second circle refer to where this is, in this case, is a shield. We think that if these institutions collaborate, that niche, because the idea is that that group of actors in the small town are really operating as a niche. And then we could discuss afterwards why we're thinking that they are niche, that this interinstitutional collaboration will shield this niche. There will be also process of learning, etc. And the impact is in the middle. The quality of life of people who live with chronic illnesses and are dependent has improved. That will be a general impact. And in the middle, we have a set of activities that, in that case, the participants define as intermediate outcomes. And that's another part of how we go about things. We are not really rigid. I mean, that would not be the term I would use, intermediate outcome. I saw this more as purely activities. but because there were some results of these activities, for instance, research in transformative innovation. So they were doing real research projects that were setting this conceptual framework of transformative innovation as the core for the analytical approach, and they were studying themselves with a view to using this kind of conceptual frameworks, transformative innovation. For them to be able to launch these research projects were considered to be an intermediate outcome. But we are flexible. We are not very
Jordi,
we're not directive on that. Yes, I'm done.
it's time to wrap up. Last
So, and that's basically because then we can discuss the monitoring. It's something that is starting to move very slowly, but once you have the theory of change, then is when you build the indicators. And when you build indicators that are related to the relevant outcomes. And when you set up a strategy for collecting these indicators and analyzing them once you have the theory of change. And again, as Margaret said, the analysis can use mixed techniques. The focus of the approach is not in mandating or recommending a specific techniques. The techniques will depend on the time of indicators you have set up, which in turn will depend on the times of outcomes. So, wrapping up, what do you need to do this? Well, you need a lot. You need a commitment and support for the agencies that are funding these programs. Without the support of the funding agency, you cannot develop an approach to evaluation like this, because this is very different from the way in which normally innovation policies are funded and are evaluated. And that the process they try to assess, they themselves require a change in the evaluation system and in the way in which you think about evaluation and policy design in innovation. And that's a bit of the biggest of the reflexive elements here, that to do systems, innovation, evaluation, you really need to do a change in the system of evaluation. And I think with this, I will just finish them and I will stop sharing.
Fabulous. Thank you so much. Now we run over our schedule a little bit, but this is super interesting. I'm thinking we could take a brief 5-minute break, and then we'll come back and we'll look at the questions. If you want to add some questions in the Miro board, Isaac will share it, and we can look at those briefly together with Martin as we come back from break. So let's be back 10 past the hour. I won't say 10 past 4 because it's not like that for Meg, for instance. So in 5-6 minutes. Okay, we'll see you soon. So, welcome back to this session with the SI Governance Hub and invited speakers. Martin, I think there's been quite a lot of activity here with good questions posed. Can we share? Yes, here they are. So I'll hand over to you.
Thank you. So we have a lot of questions to, I'm going to say Meg now, because I know Margaret is is something else due to this system, and Jordi, but also both. And I see people are still working on it. Let me just pick a first one, and I'll give that to Meg first. And that is, what mistakes do you most often see happen in evaluating a systemic project or a project in this context?
I find that the funders only know the old way. And so they'll say they are doing systems change and they hire a systems evaluator, and then they impose all these old rules on the evaluation. You must have performance indicators. We get to dictate what they are. They are expected outcomes to which the initiative must contort itself to try to achieve, even though that's not the process of transformational change. And so it just subverts the change process. We have to adapt to that by giving them what they want, but also giving them what they need, which increases our budget, creates tension between us and the funder, because the funder does not actually understand what we clearly said in the proposal was what we were going to do. And so that creates a tension that sometimes is insurmountable. So I think that teaching funders, governments, philanthropy about building their capacity to understand what is systems change, what is systems thinking, looking at theoretical models like the multi-level systems change, is fundamental to them actually having a successful, for us to have a successful evaluation and for us to help them with what they say they want to do.
Yeah, very good. So, and maybe practically, so what are your tricks and tips? Because of course you can adjust, that's what you said, or teach. But are there other, because I can, for instance, I mean, I work for the government. I can imagine, it's good, Meg, I trust her, it's good. So I'll just sign it off, And then, for instance, you come with all these insights that I can't grok, to use a very technical term, that I don't understand, because your level of development understanding is so much further than mine, let alone my colleagues. So how do you manage that?
So I'm actually shifting and getting my organization to shift from thinking of evaluation as a separate activity. And organizationally, they've divided strategic planning from program development and technical assistance from evaluation. And I said, I only want to have projects that encompass all of these, that pay for all of these, that see the interconnections and the adaptation and the learning that goes from doing all of those all at the same time, just like Jordi mentioned. And so I now have, and I say this, and now I have lots of sole source projects where, including famous philanthropic organizations, say, all right, we want you to come in, we'll call it evaluation, but you're going to do capacity building. You're going to help us review our theory of change. You're going to help us change our relationships with others. And so it builds a big capacity building piece, generic capacity building, or TA, or whatever you call it, but it goes beyond the evaluation. And that becomes, it becomes a discussion before the contract is finalized. It becomes a process that we work on in every interaction with the client, and it sets up a different relationship. And it allows them to be vulnerable. Instead of saying we're the expert and you're not doing what we want, it says we acknowledge we need to learn, we acknowledge you can help us learn, and we're just going to have that process. So it sets up a different relationship. And it's still, we still want large, fancy evaluation contracts, but it ends up being starting with a small conversation, and then a very small contract, and then it expands, and you just have to set your expectations differently, that you're starting a relationship that's going to last potentially for a very long time. And that is really about capacity building as much as it is. So I frustrate people, go, how much is this contract? I'm like, don't worry, it's the beginning. We've opened the door, we're having the conversation, which is different than a lot of traditional federal government RFPs are about.
Right. Oh, interesting. Very good. Very good. Jordi, a question for you. Sounds almost easy, but what is the hardest part in the process for you? And you're on mute, so you have to repeat it. You just
Yes,
said
that's my
something.
problem always. I am muted. Sorry, what was it? What's the hardest part of
In the process, yeah, in your experience.
I mean, to have the clients, the person in a public agency who would be able, have the capacity, the interest, the energy to embark into something like this is very difficult to find. Now, the case I have been discussing is because we have such a person in the regional government of Catalonia, which is a middle up level functionary who's in charge of implementing smart specialization strategies in the Catalan regional government. And she's an adept of system thinking, and she's, you know, a really very active public servant who has a completely different outlook from all the other public servants in Spain that I have met, and that addresses the kind of problems that Margaret was now referring to. But these people are very, very rare, because they have to combine an energy for change with knowing the system very well. Usually, the people who know the system very well, because they have been there many years, they're already tired. And so to have the combination of somebody who has been for 20, 30 years, or in this case, knowing how public policy, management, bureaucracy requirements work, and how you can then inject something like this into a structure that is not fitting, that doesn't happen very often, because by the time that you have get this kind of knowledge, you are tired and you're just going to get retired. So that's probably the most difficult part. Once you have started, I think the most difficult part is to sustain then the effort, and to sustain it even because the specific funding programs are even too short for the timeline of the theory of change. So what has happened to us is that the monitoring, it's been, it's not been done, or it's been done, it's been truncated, because that kind of monitoring and changing and rethinking the theory of change, that process is in fact longer than the kind of funding mechanisms we are using. Even if we try to shorten it, we're not talking about impacts. Even if you talk about transformative outcomes, the timelines don't quite fit the timelines of a normal innovation project in the world we move in.
Oh, we don't have an easy world to work in for us, huh?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not.
Yeah, but we're just zooming out of the question I wanted to ask, which was, can you zoom in again? Because I like that specific one. So if the theory of change is adapted as the intervention progresses, how do you ensure consistency in your evaluation, Jordi?
I mean,
for you, because I really like that idea too. It's like the vector theory of change. It's like, it's like a torrent.
I mean, the consistency is in the methods and the principles you are applying. It's a consistency in principles too. You are not diverting from seeing the process of the one that is niche, that is exploration of niches. Your goals are transformative. That's the kind of consistency. Now, that means that consistency in terms of the specific theory of change and the goals you are achieving, you shouldn't have. Because in this kind of approach, you see evaluation as a learning process. And you always say, in the lectures, second order learning, not only first order. So second order learning means that the learning has to question your assumptions and what you are doing. So if you say that the formative evaluation, that the process of evaluation should lead to second-order learning, then you shouldn't be concerned about consistency in evaluation in the terms of having specific objectives and approaches that remain unchanged during the process. No, because in fact your evaluation is oriented to learn things that will make you question what you are doing. And therefore, if you are questioning and changing what you are doing, you should not have consistency at this level. And I can understand that this, from a normal public management approaches, is very unsettling. That's why I said requires a systemic change in public management and the way we're doing evaluation as well.
Yeah, oh, it's so recognizable. Yeah, systems bubble and are alive is what Nora Bateson always says. Very good. Let's get to another question. And maybe Mario, of course, as the host, feel free to jump in. Or if people, because I pick them and I feel I have no right to do so, feel free to say, but what about my question? And you know what? Let's actually use this opportunity. So Margaret, what is your view on or reaction maybe to what Jordi explained? And yes, Jordi, I'm going to ask the same thing afterwards.
I just appreciated so much of what he has to say. And actually that multi-level perspective, I did a project with the World Bank where that is used much more globally outside the US than inside the US. But I absolutely appreciate that framework that understands that there has to be alignment across the niche to the regime to the larger landscape for there to be transformation. And so I'm so glad to see that. I do think that in terms of second order, again, he and I agree that you have to question your assumptions. And I would even push it to the third order. The second order is more like, is our strategy correct? But even is our thinking about our strategy even correct, which pushes it into the third order. And I think that a strategy that I've been using is sort of two-part. One is that I am a mentor much more now of people who are young evaluators who are beginning to ask these questions and who are being added to teams of, mostly I work with philanthropic organizations because they're more innovative, but those are the new young members with the new ideas who then become the champions before they retire. They're too young. They you know, we've caught them before they've gotten old and tired. And at the same part, those of us who are getting old and tired I have a big strategy of bringing in as many and collaborating with as many project mid-level researchers and evaluators as possible, where we co-direct projects, where I'm not just an opinion, I actually have as much say as the other person does, but they have a lot of learning that they want to get from me, so that whenever I do let go of this work, there will be this other cadre. So it's a serious problem of sort of being beaten down by 30 years of the system, when actually, can we get them young? Can we change their mindsets? It's that leverage point of mindset change. Can we get them to become champions while they're still in a position to learn and grow and change their organizations? And so that's what I appreciated from what Jordi said, and also my own strategies of trying to build up the cadre of those like us who are younger, and also internal change within the organizations we'd like to have hire us.
Very nice. Thank you, Meg. So Jordi, what did you notice from Meg's presentation?
I mean, must be said that we didn't know each other, right? We hadn't met before, as far as at least I don't recall having met before. And so for me, it's the confluence, the convergence between what she said and what then I said. We did not prepare it. We worked completely separate. And many of the main messages are the same in the way we think about evaluation, about the role of evaluation, how evaluation fits into the policy process. And for somebody who comes, see, the world of science and technology policy and innovation evaluation has always been at the margins and quite separate from the mainstream of the evaluation communities. So for me, that have not really, I said I am not a systems evaluator, a systems person at the beginning, and it's true. I'm not. I mean, come from science and technology policy evaluation to see that that this strand of systems evaluation with these principles is really very much embedded. That it's a line of thought that exists out there with a lot of practice, a lot of application, a lot of materials to which then I will go afterwards, makes me feel accompanied and not so alone, which is quite nice.
That's nice. Yeah, we're all co-journalists. Very good. Very good. Mario, how am I doing on time? Because of course I forget that.
Yeah, I mean, we have exceeded the time. We're having a great discussion here. I think maybe couple more questions, and then we'll break out into rooms, and we can discuss it more in detail, because I'd like to hear from our audience as well. We have many people here who probably have been touching on these subjects and may have some really relevant experience that we want to understand.
Very good. So, I mean, you all wrote your questions. Anybody want to pose a question live? Let's throw open the mic. I like that because we're people. And again, I'm just a conduit. So throw it open and shout, like, who's first?
I'm happy to ask a question.
Thank you, Tim. Please go ahead.
Yeah, I'm curious how you integrate using this more hypothetical or theoretical framework, the different scaling, transformative outcomes, and with the specific initiative in their context. Like, how do you combine specific strategy in their context with these more generic outcomes to really define those outcome indicators?
No. Well, that's in fact almost like our role as evaluators. So what we do is it's very much based on workshops when we build a theories of change, and the workshops are preceded by a lecture or lectures and reading in which we explain the structure, the conceptual framework, why is it there, and then we accompany the whole process when the groups start thinking about their outcomes, to make sure that their outcomes and outputs, and to make them think where these are shielding and or are of scaling. So we engage in a conversation with the participants, which are basically the program, the intervention stakeholders. We engage in a conversation with them, trying to steer them in the direction of thinking in this way. So the concept of transformative outcomes really is an heuristic to help them think in this transformative manner. And sometimes it works, sometimes it's a bit more difficult. And we are learning also in our doing how to do this better. It's a bit of a craft.
And in doing so, you kind of actually help them develop or articulate their theory of change.
Absolutely, absolutely. And they often, most of the time, say this afterwards, that have helped them clarify why they're doing things, which things are they not doing, why is it, and clarify their thinking about what needs to be in place so that an activity could aim at being transformative. And that's a bit by structuring the thinking. And it says here, Mariel, that the Catalan government will be talking about it in the next event. In fact, we have done this in our conversations with this person, with Tatiana Fernandez from the Catalan government, who was thinking also in systems way, in the systems approach, and the multi-level perspective was something that in conversations that were informal, we brought to her attention. And then she thought that's going to be useful. And then she got also into this way of structuring, thinking the policy, using this language, and we just engage in conversations in which, in fact, both sides learn in the case. And that's why also the funder, it's completely integrated in a way with those that are funded, because it's part of the same global conversation about the approach, about the way in which you define the policy, the evaluation strategy. It is an ongoing conversation. And it really does work that way. It's not easy all the time, but it does work that way.
Nice. Meg, do you have a response?
So in the US, people are less familiar with these theories. And so I hesitate even to use the word theory. And so I'll start with where they are with what their problem is. And maybe the problem is they want to scale, well, or they have a technology, but they don't know what the outcomes are. I say that's okay. And then I'll introduce something like ripple effect workshops, where they get to see that the participants have identified all kinds of outcomes, especially older adults. I did a project with older adults using technology that found lots beyond the narrow confine of reduced social isolation. There were so many other outcomes that improved the lives of the people who had the technology. And so I didn't theorize. I just said, look, let's try something to see what outcomes or results people are doing, what innovation they're doing that may be useful to you. I also some people talk about the need to scale. And of course, in the back of my mind, I'm like all these great frameworks about scaling and aligning policy with innovation and the landscape. And I just keep it to myself. I've learned to keep it to myself, but somehow I do what Jordi says, which is, so let's talk about your attempt to, especially around equity, you want to, you didn't find the people that needed this resource. And why is that? Well, maybe there are policies, organizational policies, or maybe there's something about the way the state or federal government structured the funding that didn't let you reach out to these people. And so that I introduced sort of the landscape and the barriers and the organizational regimes that create barriers, and then talk about how can those be changed and aligned. And so again, I've learned there's so much othering of systems ideas in the United States that I just absolutely try not to even go there. Unfortunately, I find that unfortunate, because that puts the US behind the rest of the world in understanding it. So it's a coping mechanism. What can I say?
Yeah, but I think it's very important I mean, it's not I would definitely believe that, for instance, in Europe, they're not everywhere like in Barcelona, as Jordi found one person in the government. So it's a very good response, very useful. And of course, always speak the language of the other, not your own. Yes, I mean, yeah. So any other questions? And if you don't say anything, I'm going to call out people. Huh?
Danny is waving.
I see it.
Yes, yes.
Do it.
I didn't find the Zoom button to raise my hand, so I'm just doing it the old-fashioned way.
It's a small room.
Yes. I've done consulting most of my life, my professional life, and I find it very difficult to have that initial conversation. So essentially, because often I meet with people who are sort of, okay, so you're the consultant, so just give me the solution. So how do you react to these kind of situations? And I don't know, maybe government is somewhat different than private industry, but I find very often sort of the consultants are thought that you have the knowledge in some PowerPoint slide, so just sell me the PowerPoint slide, and then I can just take this as a hammer, and I can go to wherever I need to be and just hit people with that hammer. And when you say, well, it's a typical consultant answer, it depends, right? People get very, very upset. So, and the thing is that like all of these things depend, right? There is no single evaluation framework. There is no single methodology. There is no single thing to poke, and boom, your system is all of a sudden doing what you couldn't get it to do in the last year. So, and I think it comes back sort of to this what we're just discussing, sort of how do you deal with the people in power, with the people with money, having no patience to try anything new, to learn anything new, because it sort of is negatively correlated with how they got to the positions that they're in.
Did we just stop or?
No,
No.
okay,
Well,
No,
maybe I
and
should have
who
ended the
who answers?
But I
Yeah.
think a reflection on this, because I did spend a lot of time thinking about this transition that we're in, that is kind of underlying everything, which is going from the kind of industrial logic to the kind of the digital economy, where we go from everything is like standardized. We have proxy indicators. We try to have a lot of volume to the lowest cost, etc. So we have hierarchies. You know, that's linking onto your thinking there, that we have these hierarchies and we have the middle managers who are looking after the budgets, etc., to a situation where actually we should look at those kind of measures, the KPIs of the old world, but actually looking at the outcomes in the real world for the end user. It could be like the citizen or whatever, and we should personalize the delivery of services to them from the public sector using data-driven approaches. And I think there is, like, for me, the missing piece of the puzzle here, which is makes this more difficult, is that we don't work in a data-driven way. You know, that could be one of those leverage points where if we actually worked in a real data-driven way, where we had an idea of the real outcomes for citizens in real time, you know, all the kind of incentive systems around it would change, and we couldn't build this kind of castles and hierarchies on the side with proxy indicators that enforce the old ways of working. So, you know, there is some, and this is really where kind of AI and that kind of technology comes into its own, because if we can work in a data-driven way, we can apply AI and new technologies, and we can get completely different outcomes that are transformative. But, you know, as long as we do this in a kind of proxy way, it's going to be difficult.
So one thing that makes me not very much hopeful is that the legend of Cassandra is already in the Greek mythology, right? So even with the Greeks, people just didn't want to listen to the people who said, maybe I think that's not a good idea. And I think today it's unfortunately no better. It probably got worse with what you just mentioned, the measurement of the KPI, right? If the person gets rewarded based on an artificial KPI that may or may not correlate with the outcomes in reality, they will try to optimize the KPI, right? Because that's what made them successful. That got them into the position of power. And so I just find it very very difficult to sort of engage in these situations. And I thought, I mean, Jordi mentioned he found that one person, but like, what if we don't have to rely on this one hero? How do you? And I'm sure it is difficult, and we probably share all very much the same experience. But how do you not just? I think that the system change starts before you even see the system. It starts with the person who holds the purse strings, or the power to start a project, to do something. Like how do you engage with these people to get through the gatekeepers to the system?
Yeah, but one thing is what I say is completely true. I don't know how many years I'm in this business. This person is different. It's unique, but it's scaling. Yeah, so this is starting to grow. It's starting to grow internally in the regional government, because she's smart and she's organized a whole lot of people that are working in this direction, many of whom are young. So it's also the response to what Margaret was saying of you surround yourself with people who then you kind of socialize in this way of thinking. So in the implementation of these programs, which are now several and growing, this is internally growing. And then she's been integrated in different environments of policy discussion at an European level. This is being discussed at the OECD, it's being discussed at the European Commission, it's being discussed in academic environments. So, you know, that's the nature of complex systems, in which sometimes things that start small in one place can have big ripple effects, and maybe this one will have. So that's one. The second is that somebody wrote here is context dependent. Absolutely. Now that in this kind of transformative innovation policy, the work that the consortium has done, I've forgotten to mention in my presentation that the last slide had a link to a kind of resource facility that on the net built by this consortium on how to develop and implement and evaluate these policies with a lot of detail. So the work of this consortium, which has been in many different countries, you will find many different reasons why agencies get involved with this and many different outcomes. In some cases, it was in Sweden, in fact, we're thinking Vinnova, which has the resources, of thinking different ways of implementing and developing their policies and had, from traditional missions, the normal way things have always been done, ours more transformative, some based more on design thinking, had a many of things they tested and tried, and ours was one of them. And then they kind of went for another one and did a little bit of other stuff. So that's one way in which you address. In other countries, my feeling is that there's quite a bit of window dressing. Then the concepts are very comfortable, the concepts are quite nice, but then when you go to the implementation, you see the implementation is more aligned with the traditional ways of doing things with a different language. So in some cases, in some countries are very skeptical. So there are things that happen, and the reasons why you want to have local policy engagement with these alternative ways of thinking will vary a lot from place to place. But it's important to have the conversation going and growing, because as the community grows, more people get exposed to this possible alternative and may consider them and may apply them, and it gets a bit of traction. Hopefully, it is right now. We'll see in 5 years. Right now, it's getting a bit of traction.
Very
So
good.
how is everyone feeling? Should we go out into some smaller sessions? And because I'd like to hear from all of you who are in the room. It would be interesting to hear your thoughts.
So
Should we
Mario,
Yeah.
you missed the discussion that I and Isaac had in the chat because you were hosting and paying attention. We were too. We thought, for the last 50 minutes, we can do it here as well, because we're kind of having a good chat. So if you agree, let's just post some questions here, which I kind of did already. So
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And then I'm hoping that participants are able to share some views in the chat if they don't want to speak up.
Yeah, I had a little bird told me that Sivana maybe had a question. I don't know if that's right. Or yes, you. Yeah. Or a remark or an idea. I just like to throw up in the room too, as you might gather.
You.
You. No, sorry. So you can deny or throw off the video right away. It's all good. It's digital. You can get away with anything.
Well, I was kind of curious. I wasn't sure that I'm getting it right, but I'm a design thinking facilitator, and I have a little bit of experience with the public sector. And what I found is the biggest challenge is getting the data from the field, like measuring in the local offices, in the local communities, welfare offices, and I found that I couldn't find any solution for that anywhere I was looking for. So many beautiful brains around here in this room. I was thinking